Today is May the 1st, 2017. My name is Tanya Finchum. I'm with Oklahoma State University, and today I am in Pawhuska, well, north of Pawhuska, I guess.
Right.
On the Tallgrass Prairie Preserve. I guess I should say the correct name. Joseph H. Williams Tallgrass Prairie Preserve, right?
Right.
And I'm speaking with Bob Hamilton, who is the director and has been for quite a while. So thank you for having me today.
Yeah, thank you for coming up. Appreciate it.
This is going to be part of our series on monarchs. We'll get to that in a little while, but we'll talk about other things along the way. So let's begin with when and where you were born.
I'm told December 14th, 1957 in Alexandria, Virginia.
Wow. And I guess the question would be, the reason for being there, your
How did a
parents.
Virginia boy get back here?
Yes.
Yeah, well, my folks were from Kansas. My mother's family from Wellington, Kansas, kind of south of Wichita, just not too far into Kansas. My dad's family is from Kansas City. And so when I was 12, I think it's when we moved back to Wellington, Kansas. So kind of started junior high, high school, and then went to college in Kansas, several different places. So I think of myself as more of a Kansan than a Virginian by far.
That's where do you consider home
Yeah. And we still have a lot of family up in that area.
in Kansas?
Yeah.
What took your parents to Virginia?
My dad was a journalism major. My folks met at University of Kansas up in Lawrence at KU. And so he worked with the Department of Transportation, several different federal agencies, and some private transportation type agencies. And so that's what took us. He basically worked in Washington, D.C.
Okay. And do you have siblings?
Yeah. I have a younger sister that lives in Wichita and an older sister that lives in Phoenix.
So you're in the middle.
I'm the middle guy, yeah.
And so elementary school would have been in Kansas? No.
Was
It
in
would have been
Virginia.
Virginia.
Right. So I think I started 7th grade in Wellington.
Okay. Was that a tough move?
A little bit, although, we'd come back. We spent a lot of time in the summer back in Wellington with my grandparents on my mom's side. So that was kind of our annual summer migration, was to come back to the Wild West, as we thought of it back then, and hang out with those folks. And my grandparents had a fishing lease down Chickaskey River, down by Drury, Kansas, kind of very southern, south central Kansas. And so kind of those experiences, hunting and fishing with my grandpa, that's kind of how I ended up doing what I'm doing, I think.
So in high school, your favorite subject would have been biology?
Yeah, I kind of got into biology and went to college thinking I wanted to be a forester. You get these ideas in your head. Boys grow up thinking they want to be firemen, that kind of thing. And thought I wanted to be a forester, and so, majored in biology, went to Southwestern College at Winfield, Kansas, a small liberal arts school that had a real good, and still has a real good biology department. And about my sophomore year, I think it was the summer of my sophomore year, I went to a summer forestry camp, kind of like a summer school program at Colorado State University, at Pingree Park, so kind of in northern Colorado. And at least kind of the way they were teaching that at that time, forestry really meant timber production. And I kind of figured out fairly quickly I wasn't really interested in growing trees for wood, for dimensional lumber and pulpwood and things like that. I was more interested in the wildlife side of things. And so finished my degree there at Winfield at Southwestern College with a biology degree, and then went on to graduate school at Emporia State University at Emporia, and again majored in biology. And was very fortunate the summer I got out, the summer of 1982. I'm dating myself, of course. I was lucky to get on as kind of a seasonal intern, just a seasonal position with the Nature Conservancy up in South Dakota on a preserve up there. And that kind of was my in with the Conservancy. So that's where I've been ever since.
Got your foot in the door.
Yep. That summer, a permanent job opened up in North Dakota at a new preserve, Cross Ranch Preserve, north of Bismarck, about 40 miles north of Bismarck. And so I applied for it and just managed to get that job, and it was just amazing, And that same summer, I got engaged to my college sweetheart, and so we got married that winter, in January of 1983, and spent our honeymoon in a Ryder truck driving north to Bismarck. Our grand adventure. Yeah. So we lived up there for 6 years, up at Cross Ranch, and then got to thinking, well, it'd be nice to kind of migrate back down towards the southern plains to be around family. And at that time, the Oklahoma program was starting to grow, and they were looking for a kind of a statewide director of science and stewardship. And so I slid into that job in the summer of 1988.
Well, what would be some of the things you would do during the day early on like that?
With that job?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a statewide position, so it was really designing new nature preserves around the state. Really interesting time. We were getting into a lot of bat cave work, a lot of endangered bats, and some terrestrial stuff, some prairie projects and things like that. So it really involved working and down in the Ouachita Mountains, so kind of from one corner of the state to the next. From the very southeast corner, we had a new project down by Poto at the time, and then Black Mesa Preserve in the very western edge of the Panhandle. So it was a lot of road time, and but it was exciting. I mean, it was cool being involved in all those different ecosystem types, and like I say, designing new preserves and then overseeing the management of our existing properties. So it was cool stuff. A lot of different day-to-day sort of issues. Yeah.
Well, had you learned what you needed to know in your graduate program, or was it on the job, or a little bit of mix?
Oh, a little bit, but yeah, yeah. The real world is quite different,
Yes.
Than the ivory tower. So yeah, hopefully your higher education gives you the foundation, but every organization, every agency, has their methods and their own culture. So you have to kind of figure that out. But yeah, I think my schooling gave me a good background, but then it was kind of growing with the position, I think.
Was it the type of job that you'd have successes, like you'd start a project and, oh, this is going to work really well, or no, this isn't?
Yeah, no, a lot of land negotiations. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't.
Okay.
And of course, part of all that, the Nature Conservancy primarily runs on privately fundraised money, and so sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't. So helping cultivate donors and lining up grants and all that kind of stuff is part of that position. So yeah, kind of a smorgasbord of job responsibilities. So pretty fast and quick pace sort of stuff.
Yeah. Ever changing, sounds like.
Yeah, but it's inspirational work, because I kind of jokingly get up in the morning and say, oh, I got to save the world today. And that's kind of what we're all about, is piece by piece trying to protect our biological diversity, and it's a great job, great institution, great company, great organization. You get to work with some really good people that are quite inspired and inspirational, and get to work with some tremendous partners. So it's just a fun job. Yeah.
Well, in '88, when you came here, it wasn't already. You helped form it.
Yeah, so this project, it was kind of funny. When I was in graduate school up in Emporia, the National Park Service tried to create a Tallgrass Prairie National Preserve in the central part of the Flint Hills in Kansas. And that whole effort collapsed because of political problems. And so then when I was in North Dakota, about the mid-'80s, about 1985 or so, the Park Service, that the idea reconstituted itself down here in Osage County, Oklahoma. And so there was an effort that started in the mid-'80s to create a National Tallgrass Prairie Preserve, or an element of the National Park Service, federal ownership. And so my mom used to send me little clippings out of the Wichita paper. She kind of kept me posted on that whole thing, because I've always been a prairie enthusiast. And looked like it was going to happen. The legislation was introduced in Congress, and so it was kind of funny when I came down to interview for the Oklahoma job. I think that was in June or July of 1988. And you always have to be prepared to ask questions yourself during an interview. So one of the questions I had at the end of the interview, I said, well, if I got the job, if I became the science guy for Oklahoma, for the Conservancy, and assuming this new Park Service thing happens, would I have any role in that thing? And the answer was, from the staff doing the interview, that, well, yeah, I'm sure they'd like to hear, what you have to say, because we'd started a fire program and introduced bison on the preserve. I was at North Dakota. So the answer was, yeah, I'm sure they'd like to, hear what you have to say, but it's really gonna be a Park Service thing. And, the Conservancy, we got other fish to fry, so we're gonna move on. Well, between that time and like a month later or so, when I actually reported for the new job, the Park Service deal had collapsed in Congress. There was a grand compromise that had been struck, and that fell all apart. And so, literally 2 weeks on the job here in Oklahoma, the first state board meeting I went to, we have state boards of directors, and so we had a meeting in Oklahoma City, and I went to that, like I said, 2 weeks on the job, and the big issue at the board meeting was the Prairie Park issue. The federal effort had collapsed, and what our board was pushing strongly for private action. Basically, the message was, the feds ain't going to get it done. That ship has sailed. If there's going to be any large-scale prairie conservation effort in Osage County, it's going to have to be a private deal. It's going to have to be the Nature Conservancy. We got to crap or get off the pot, so to speak. And so there was a motion made by the board for the staff to start looking into the feasibility of doing a big prairie project. So, boom, right away, that became the number one issue for me to deal with in my new job. So, one thing led to another, and we started negotiating for the Barnard Ranch. And in the fall of 1989 was when we closed on the property. So we bought a little over 29,000 acres in November of 1989 as kind of the starter, the starter size, or the keystone property for this project. And since then we've added to it, so now the preserve is just about 40,000 acres. So it was kind of funny that, yeah, it just sort of all played out. The timing of it was great for me to be involved from the ground floor. It's just been a hoop to be part of the thing long term.
And no one's tried to steal you away.
Yeah, so it's been kind of nice, and yeah. It's been a great project, yeah.
Well, I'm not familiar with the Barnard.
Barnard?
Barnard
Ranch.
Yes. What was the significance of that? Was this one piece altogether?
Yeah, this was historically the Chapman Barnard Ranch. So if you look at the old ranch signs, it's a hyphenated thing. Mr. Chapman and Mr. Barnard were related by marriage. They ran the ranch as one unit, but the ownership was really separate. And so, both those gentlemen passed away years ago. And so the Barnard portion of the ranch, like I say, a little over 29,000 acres, went up for sale there in 1989. Okay. And so for the first time since it had been put together, Mr. Barnard and Mr. Chapman started putting together their enterprise up here in the teens, so just about 100 years ago. And so for the first time then, these big properties were coming on the market. So it was literally once in several lifetime opportunity. And you don't get many swings at those kind of pitches. And so we were lucky to be able to connect on that.
Had to have financing in place or at least started.
Yeah, and so this was a big, the Tallgrass project was meaningful for us, meaningful for the Nature Conservancy, I think meaningful for conservation above and beyond just the project itself. It stretched our ability to do large-scale projects, and so the price tag for the preserve, kind of that initial fundraising campaign, we had a capital campaign then to raise the money, and $15 million was the target. That was about half of that was to buy the property. The other half was for an operating endowment, basically put money in the bank and operate off of the interest generated. And then there was a chunk of that too that was a startup expense for the first 5 or 6 years. Hire the people, all the equipment, facilities, all that kind of stuff. And so 15 million bucks, that was a huge price tag at the time. I don't know what that'd be in today dollars. But it challenged our state board, it challenged our national board, our national organization. And so our state board recognized from the get-go we weren't going to be able to raise that kind of money just in Oklahoma. And if you remember back in the late 80s, the economy in Oklahoma was suffering a little bit too. Mm-hmm. And so it pushed the organization to think beyond our borders. The Nature Conservancy, I think what's one of the things that's made us successful is our state program model. So we have state programs in all 50 states, and we're active in 30-some foreign countries now. But the organization started in the US, of course, and I think having that state-by-state model has worked real well through the years. And typically what that means is if you want to do a project in your state, you want to protect some land or a stream system or something like that, do some conservation easements, whatever, you typically have to raise that money within your borders. So donors are thought of as kind of captive entities. And so, again, for us to raise that kind of money, we weren't going to be able to do that just in Oklahoma. And so it became a national level project, and so we were given access to donors outside of Oklahoma. And so John Sawhill was the president of the Nature Conservancy at the time, and he coined the term One Conservancy, meaning that we need to be above and beyond what we are in terms of this confederation of state programs. For big projects, we have to pull together and kind of work as one entity. And so I think that kind of created a new model for the Conservancy to do things bigger and more aggressive than what we had done in the past. So this project really stretched our organization and kind of pushed us into thinking big and doing bigger, you know. So not only is it a tremendous project in itself, it really kind of reset the mold for the Conservancy.
Well, the 40 acres, is that the biggest piece of property the Conservancy
40,000?
does? 40,000?
No, we have bigger projects than that, but in terms of kind of a single fundraising effort,
Okay.
that was, and we've raised more money than that since then, but in terms of a broad-based, it was about a 5-year capital campaign. It was a concerted effort, you know, above and beyond just Oklahoma to raise the money. So.
Well, what was the initial goal to do with the property? What was the plans
From the get-go, I mean, the ecological objective,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean, the Nature Conservancy is all about protecting biological diversity, and that's what we've been about since, well, 60-some years. It's how the organization is 1951, I believe. And so I think of the Conservancy as being kind of the real estate arm of the conservation movement, of the private conservation movement. So typically, we don't get involved in political struggles. You know, we don't chain ourselves to bulldozers and that kind of thing. We're at the more conservative end of the spectrum when it comes to conservation organizations, and we tend to focus more on, like, say, the real estate end of things. We are science-driven. Science informs us where the best examples of ecosystems still remain, things like the Tallgrass Prairie. Where are the best examples of these natural systems? Where are the endangered species and species of concern out there on the landscape? Where are the best examples of those populations? So science informs us where we should be working. Science informs us then what strategies we should be taking to try to protect those systems. What kind of partnerships we need to form to do those projects. And then, of course, especially like in a project like this, science is a huge part of evaluating ourselves, constantly trying to look at, you know, are we getting there in terms of our conservation objectives. So, I mean, here at the preserve, we're probably up around 200 scientific publications now that have been produced from the preserve by various scientists. A lot, if you had to narrow it down, probably Oklahoma State University has been the primary producer of science off of the preserve. So we are not a research institution per se, but these big projects and some of the ecosystems that we protect and some of the species populations are quite interesting to scientists and conservationists, and so we make our sites available for research. And that information, again, helps us. Yeah.
Well, initially, was there a particular insect or grass or whatever you were trying to,
This was the ecosystem itself.
that whole system?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so the Tallgrass Prairie, kind of the big picture perspective is that in pre-settlement times, before the landscape was converted by European movements, back in the old days, the tallgrass ran from the Gulf of Mexico up to southern Canada. So kind of the entire eastern side of the Great Plains, 140-some million acres originally, has gone through the most intense land conversion of any of our major ecosystem types on the continent. So the most highly converted landscape is the tallgrass system. So only about 4 to 5% of that original 140 million acres still remains. The other 95% or so of the original tallgrass has been turned into something else, primarily wheat fields, corn fields, soybeans. It's that real productive eastern end of the Great Plains, the breadbasket of North America. So much of what used to be tallgrass prairie is now are real productive farmlands. But those soils, the tremendous organic content in the soil, that was built by the tallgrass prairie over thousands of years. And so really it's those former prairie lands that are now the breadbasket of North America. So tallgrass in itself is the least protected, most highly impacted and least protected of our major systems. So that's why for years, for decades, there's been this desire by the National Park Service to fill in one of the missing pieces, one of the missing jewels of the crown, so to speak, in the National Park Service system. What was really lacking was an example of tallgrass prairie. We have those mountainous systems out west and deserts and all that kind of ecosystem types with federal lands, but in this part of the prairie, which is for the most part privately owned, the tallgrass never was really adequately protected. So this is the largest protected example of tallgrass prairie in North America. We think probably globally also, because other tallgrass systems around the world have met the same fate. It's the land that you can till and grow crops on. And so this is the largest protected example of tallgrass prairie, and the most aggressive attempt to try to restore that original ecosystem. So the Conservancy's goals here are really to first of all protect the ecosystem and then try to restore that functioning tallgrass prairie ecosystem, that whole grazing fire interaction that we think was so important historically.
I guess that would bring a good time to bring in bison.
Yeah.
That's part of restoring to the or
Right.
buffalo.
Yeah, we know from historical accounts, Native American accounts, modern sciences tell us that the prairie was really a disturbance-driven ecosystem. Historically, what was so important to the prairie was fire and grazing and climate. Of course, climate is kind of the overriding factor. We can't do a whole lot with climate on the ground, that's above my pay grade. But in terms of grazing and fire, how we think the Great Plains used to operate in pre-settlement times was just this chaotic grazing fire interaction system. Native Americans out there using fire, all different seasons for all different purposes, fires moving across the landscape. So many of those early historical accounts, early European explorers and military expeditions, they talk about the prairie just being on fire all the time, year-round. And actually that's some of the first research that we paid for was with Dr. Jim Shaw in the zoology department over at Oklahoma State. For him and a graduate student to look back, kind of create a compendium really of historical accounts from the southern Great Plains. And so what Jim and the student did was looking at different slivers of that early settlement history, pulling together all those historical accounts and analyzing what was going on in terms of the seasonality of fire and the frequency of fire, and oh, by the way, what was going on with bison, elk, pronghorn, trying to get a snapshot in time of how the system maybe looked. And what that told us, again, was that the prairie was burning all the time. And the idea of migration by bison has been pretty well poo-hooed over the last few decades. We think more or less what was going on was maybe there were some regional movements by bison, but we think it was really kind of a forage-driven system. Burn it and they will come. Whether you're talking an Native American set fire or a lightning strike fire, and this is a global phenomenon we see around the world, where we have grazers and fire, grazers and a burnable grassland system, you have this tremendous grazing fire interaction. So when you burn the prairie, that lush regrowth that comes up afterwards, wow, it doesn't get any better than that for a grazer. I mean, every bite's a good bite, tremendously lush, highly digestible, highly nutritious. It's ice cream to them. And so it's highly attractive to herbivores, not only bison, cattle, giraffes, hippos, kangaroos in Australia. There's a growing body of literature out there saying that, yeah, this is a global phenomenon, this grazing-fire interaction. So we think that's what was really going on in the North American prairies in pre-settlement times, was fire happening all the time, bison responding to that, moving around the landscape in search of high-quality forage. And so we think it was this very mixed up, diverse, patchy, funky sort of landscape. So what I think is, and what we're trying to do here then is restore that to some degree. It's on a much smaller scale, of course. But I think of it as kind of managed chaos is what we're trying to do.
Well, then how often do you burn, and how much physically?
So yeah, we burn roughly about a third within the bison unit, and the bison have, of the 40,000 acres, the bison have about 2/3 of that. So about 24,000 acres is what they're free to run around on. We pulled out about 50 to 60 miles of internal fence within their unit, and so they can go where they want to go within that fenced perimeter. And we move them around with fire. We move them with fire, not fences. Burn it, and they will go. They will come to those spots. And so we burn roughly about a third of their unit each year. So we're essentially on about a 3 or 4 year fire return interval, which we think is what the historical fire frequency was. And then we're trying to somewhat, again, simulate the seasonality of fire. So from that work that Jim Shaw did and his students, that told us that, yeah, the fire was happening year-round. So we burned spring, summer, and fall in the bison unit. And the added little twist to the whole thing is it's primarily a random selection type system. We have no fixed burn units. It's not like Unit A gets burned every 3 years, come hell or high water. No, it's kind of a random selection sort of approach, trying to build back in and respecting that historic connection between grazers and fire. And so a patch that, when we randomly select points on the landscape, a patch that's been fairly recently burned and is getting intensive grazing, it doesn't have the fuel load to support a new fire. And so that gets ignored, that gets rejected. You go on to the next patch. And so in that instance, grazers, primarily bison in the bison unit, are influencing where and when fire can occur. And we think that's historically what used to happen. It's easy to see you burn a patch, that lush regrowth, that pulls in the bison. Well, at the same time then, those grazers are altering the fuel load. They're consuming that grass, and so they are reducing the probability of that patch burning again in the near future. And so they are influencing where fire is going to occur. And so it's a yin-yang, which came first, the fire or the bison? Yeah, I don't know. It's a chicken and the egg sort of thing. But that's what we're trying to get back to, is this more fluid, somewhat random, kind of a managed chaos sort of approach, with the ultimate objective being maintenance of this very diverse landscape, all these different patch types. We know from modern wildlife ecology that different species require different patch types, different amounts of grass, different amounts of time of recovery from fire. Grassland birds are a great example. Some species require very short patches. When they migrate back in the springtime, what they're looking for is a patch that's just been recently burned that looks like your carpet in your living room. That's their search image. Other species, when they migrate back, Henslow sparrow are a great example. They're kind of our old growth grassland species. When they migrate back from Venezuela in springtime, what they're looking for is patches out there in the landscape that have several years of standing dead grass. You won't find Henslows nesting in a recently burned patch. They've got to be in that old grass. And so that's what's burned into their brains. That's their search image, is what they're looking for, is that old grass. And then there's a lot of species in between. And so we, the Nature Conservancy, we're in the biological diversity business. We want all those characters to come along for the ride, all those native species. And the only way you can do that is by having all these different habitat opportunities at any given moment in time, and that has to move through the years, of course. And so it's kind of this ongoing juggling act to provide and maintain all these different patch types out there. So again, it's kind of this managed chaos approach, with the objective being to maintain this very diverse landscape for natural diversity.
It sounds very complicated.
Yeah, so it's stimulating though. As a land manager, grasslands are fun because you have to be proactive. You can't sit on your hands. It's not, I think like, I don't know anything about Western systems, but some of those Western forests, you know, their disturbance regime is a Douglas fir tree lives to be 400 years old, and eventually it falls over from a windstorm or whatever, crashes to the ground, creates a gap in the canopy. Now for the first time, sunlight can penetrate all the way down to the forest floor. Ooh, that's a gap, that's an opportunity. You get a whole new successional trend then, species filling that gap that otherwise don't have that kind of opportunity. So once every 400 years that happens. You can't sit on your hands for 400 years here. You sit on your hands for 40 years and don't do fire, and you don't have a prairie anymore, it's a forest. So this system is very, especially in the tallgrass region, on this eastern side of the Great Plains where we have relatively high precipitation, the woody species are constantly trying to invade the prairie. And so easily within one human generation, if you exclude fire from the system for 20, 30 years, it's no longer a prairie. The woody species take over. And so it's a fun place to work because you got to keep rolling.
Well, in your almost 30 years here, can you remember and recall how it's changed?
Yes, we did we had a couple thousand acres on the preserve that had some Osage orange or bodark invasion that had happened 30, 40 years ago, or before that. And so we had to mechanically come in and clip those trees. And then we've used fire to keep that country open. We had a little bit of eastern red cedar invasion onto the uplands that we took care of in a similar way. But for the most part, this ranch, this property, had been very well taken care of historically by Mr. Barnard and Mr. Chapman. It was kind of their showcase place. And that was one of the reasons we were attracted to it, was because of the past stewardship. And so they had not allowed rapid, invasion of the prairie by tree species. So they recognized that as a threat, even back in the old days. So now, of course, that's a tremendous problem, really from Texas to the north.
And our red cedars, definitely.
Yeah, and our friends at Oklahoma State University have coined the term the Green Glacier. So you basically have this glacier of juniper species, primarily eastern red cedar, but the problem is really moving from south to north. So it's the opposite movement of past glaciers. This is a tree invasion, not an ice invasion, but a growing problem all the way up through Nebraska, even pushing up into the Dakotas now, of eastern red cedar coming out into the prairie, and it's because we've altered the fire regime. Eastern red cedar is a native species, but historically it was probably relegated to those sites, real steep hillsides, right along rivers, areas that were naturally fire protected. But now we've come in with kind of Smoky Bear policy and people's discomfort in using fire, and by excluding fire, boy, eastern red cedar quickly moves out into the uplands and takes over the prairie.
It's everywhere.
Yeah, so it's a game changer. And for wildlife species, it's a huge game changer. There's been some recent work with prairie chickens, especially with lesser prairie chickens, showing the degree of discomfort that prairie chickens have, and grouse, prairie grouse in general. There's a number of species that have the same avoidance, but they avoid any kind of vertical structure, whether that's a tree or a telephone pole or a wind turbine. For them, I think, we don't know what chickens are thinking, but the assumption is they have evolved in a horizontal landscape, very few vertical objects, and they've learned through the years, what's been burned into their brains is to avoid those vertical objects because those might be perches for predators. And the taller the object, the larger the avoidance. And so with lesser prairie chickens, it's been shown that all it takes is 1 to 2 cedar trees per hectare. So 1 or 2 trees per 2.5 acres. And you go from a lot of chickens to no chickens. So in their minds, that's a forest now. That's no longer a prairie. And they just will not inhabit that. So eastern red cedar is not only an agricultural problem, sucks tremendous amount of moisture out of the soil, shades out a whole lot of forage if you're in the livestock business. Changes the fire ecology. I mean, that's one of the challenges we're seeing in kind of those wildland urban interface areas where people have built in the cross timbers, built their homes in the cross timbers, in those areas that they've now allowed eastern red cedar to invade the prairies, and they are so explosive when they burn that it changes the fire ecology and the ability to control fire. And so cedar is a challenge in a lot of ways, and it changes, especially for certain grassland birds, it quickly changes their acceptability of that habitat. Yeah.
So you watch birds, and you watch bison,
Mm-hmm.
and what else would be on that people would recognize if on this area, in this area? Coyotes, I guess.
Oh yeah, yeah. We have the complete array of mid-sized mammals on down. The big guys are what, of course, got extirpated in historical times. Bison, wolves, grizzly bears. those
You
big.
don't have any of those?
No, none of those around here.
Any plans to get those?
No. We have no plans to reintroduce wolves. We got to be clear on that. That's the non-starter in this part of the world. But we have plenty of coyotes and bobcats. The occasional mountain lion comes through. They use huge ranges, of course, and they're pretty far-reaching sort of animals. But yeah, all the way down to small mammals and all that kind of stuff.
Well, and were you planning to introduce anything else? You mentioned elk earlier. Is that?
We've thought about elk a few times through the years, but they're a challenge. They are a containment challenge. You know, you have to have an 8-foot woven wire fence is kind of the standard for that. Very expensive fencing. There's some disease issues. They are part of the challenge in Yellowstone, if you're familiar with that whole issue out there with brucellosis and tuberculosis in the Yellowstone ecosystem with bison and elk. And so bison have somewhat of an image problem, I would say, within private livestock circles. And so that makes them pretty tough to think about, you know, in terms of reintroducing. Yeah. So we'll see, maybe eventually, but
bison's doing what you want to be done.
yeah,
Anyway,
bison
they're
were the
accomplishing their
primary
job.
grazer in historic times, and so that made sense to start with the big guys. 30 to 60 million bison was the estimate in historic times, and so yeah, that's what we started.
How many's on the acreage today?
Yeah, we started out with 300 animals that were all donated by Kenneth and Diana Adams in the name of their daughter, Christina, back in the fall of 1993. So they gave us the 300 animals that we started with. They came off their ranch over by Bartlesville. They're kind of between Bartlesville and Dewey. So those were the 300 animals. We had a big release event in the fall of 1993. Initially on about 5,000 acres on the west side. And then it took about 15 years to gradually build up to the unit size that we have now. And the herd gradually built through the years. So now we typically have about 2,000 bison that we overwinter, and then we'll have about 600 to 700 calves each spring. So that's what's happening right now is the calving season. Yeah.
So you have a vet on call or on staff?
Well, not really. I
No?
mean, the bison depends on how you manage them. But I think bison, their strength from a manager's perspective, if you give them lots of space, you respect their inherent wildness. They're still basically a wild species. I mean, you can tame down individuals to come, eat out of the feed bucket, but they're still essentially a wild animal. And that's the way we try to approach it. We have 13 bison herds now, the Nature Conservancy does, from Mexico up through the Dakotas. And we try to manage them all in pretty much the same way where we're respecting the wildness of the species. We want them to be as natural as possible. Primarily what we're using them for is these prairie restoration attempts. Let's put as much of the machinery back out there as possible and get the dynamics working. And so what that means is we don't supplement the animals, so they don't get any kind of protein or energy supplement through the wintertime. They just get the grass that grows and the water that flows. And as long as they stay home, and they're really not that hard to contain, most of our boundary fence is a 6-foot barbed wire fence. But if you give them a lot of space and don't hassle them, We have fairly low stocking rate here, and again, we're burning all these different patches year round, and so we're always giving them a new plate to look at on the smorgasbord. And so they seem pretty happy. They're not trying to leave the place. And so the way we manage them is low inputs and not a whole lot of hands-on sort of management, and that seems to work pretty well. So we do round them up once a year. We try to gather the whole bunch. It's been a number of years since we think we got everybody. There's always a handful or more that don't want to participate in the annual party, Usually those are older bulls or older cranky cows that they know the drill and they hide, We've had a few times where an animal comes through the squeeze chute and we haven't seen them for 2 years. It's like, where have you been? They all have microchip ear tags in their ears, so we kind of know individuals. We have records at the individual level. But we round them all up once a year for really 2 primary reasons. One is a health maintenance program. We don't want to get into the health issues like Yellowstone has had, not to throw them under the bus, but that's a big complex situation up there with Yellowstone. But we, the Nature Conservancy, we're coming into a privately owned landscape. We want to work with our rancher neighbors on bigger conservation efforts to try to work with them to preserve this big intact landscape. And so neighbor relations are very important. Being considered a productive part of the community is very important. And we don't want an issue like animal disease to be a hand grenade that goes off. And so we monitor our herd very closely, work with our local vet to prevent any kind of disease issues. And so Roundup, a big part of it is health maintenance. And the other part of Roundup is to pull off those surplus animals, to be the predator. So we as managers are the predator. And so we have to decide what we think is the appropriate stocking rate and the sex and age ratio and all that kind of stuff. Because again, we have no plans to reintroduce the historic predators. And so we have to make those decisions. So Roundup is, I think of it as kind of a point in time predation where the wolves come. And we pull off those surplus animals and we sell them by sealed bid live to private bison producers. And so they go into the bison ranching business. So that's kind of the 2 reasons we really do Roundup.
Well, on the tags, can you monitor where they go? Or is it just
No.
an ID?
No, these are transponder tags, so you have to activate the tag with a handheld wand. So you have to be within about 8 or 10 inches of the tag with your magic stick. And so the way it works is you catch an animal in the squeeze chute, just like you would a domestic livestock. It's a little bigger and a little stronger squeeze chute, but you give them that mechanical hug, to immobilize them, and it protects them and protects us. And then we can get in there closer and you swipe that tag. It's a little button tag in their left ear, and it has a microchip embedded in that plastic. And that brings up, Kay Krebs is sitting there in our little computer shed with the laptop that has all the records in it. And so you beep, you scan that animal like they're going through the checkout stand, and bing, it brings up its record on the computer. You know how old it is, where it came from, any comments from last year, what it weighed, all that kind of stuff. And for the most part, the culling decisions are all worked out beforehand, who stays and who goes. So it's pretty quick then to decide, okay, that animal gets kicked back out, or oop, nope, goes into pin number 3 to get sold, that kind of thing. So it's a fairly, if it all works, technology, if it all works, then it's a pretty smooth operation. But it still takes about 6 or 7 days to process the whole herd.
And you have to have help from
it takes about
neighbors.
a dozen or so people to run it, various positions. So it's kind of a factory operation once you get into it.
Do you know if you have any current generations that are from the very first herd?
First animals are all gone.
But any of their offspring?
Oh yeah.
Like great grandmothers.
Yeah, and the herd is primarily grown through natural attrition.
Within itself.
Like
too.
growth within itself. About the first 10 years, we did bring in some more outside genetics. We traded with some of our other conservancy herds. We bought animals from other sources that we knew we didn't have. So we got some animals from Wichita Wildlife Refuge, actually a donation of some animals back early on. We bought animals all the way from up in Montana, the National Bison Range up in Montana, to add to the kind of the genetic mix that we already had. So we have a very broad genetic base to our herd.
What's your oldest one, age-wise?
Oldest one would probably be, we've got some 13, 14-year-old cows out there. Typically, that's about when they get pulled off, is about 12, 13 years old. The bulls, we tend to pull them off a little bit sooner, usually when they're 6 to 8, maybe 9 years old. They're not really at their physical peak till they're 10 or 12, but by that point they get awful hard to handle, those older bulls. They think they own the place when they're 5 or 6, but you get another 5, 6 years on them, they really get hard to handle. And especially in the corrals, as we're moving the animals through and they're all mixed up still together before we get them sorted off, the big risk in handling the bison and working them every year is, I think of it as kind of the bison on bison violence. They're very hard on each other. They're an interesting species because at the one hand, they have a tremendously strong herding instinct. They want to be together. They're almost like a school of fish. As you move them around, they're very tight. That cohesive herd instinct is tremendously strong. But when you get them too crowded, or especially in a high stress situation like in a corral, and they're all pushed together, I think of it as the crowded elevator phenomenon. When you get in an elevator and people are right there, they're touching you, they're inside your bubble,
Yes.
that's not good. You're uncomfortable. Well, bison, when they're in that situation, they start hooking each other. They know they have those horns on their head, and especially those big dominant older animals, they're intolerant of those little guys banging against them and disrespecting them. And so they start throwing the little guys around. And so that's the big risk. And so especially those older bulls, that's one of the big reasons we pull them out a little bit earlier, is try to cut down on some of that fighting and that damage that they could do.
A lot of individual personalities too, I bet.
Yeah, they're a cool animal. Like I say, they still are essentially wild. It's like anything, you learn about their general behaviors and what to expect, but they can still surprise you. And they're just so fast and so powerful is the risk. If you need to come and watch the roundup sometime. And you'll see, our corrals are all specially built for bison, so a little bit taller, it's all made out of steel, so they can bang against it as long as they want. It's very loud though, because of all the steel. But what you'll see is that where humans are working closely to the animals, we're all on elevated catwalks. So the standard wall in our corral is about 7 feet tall, or a little bit taller than that. Pipe steel, some of it's sheet metal. So we need a pretty good barrier there so they can't jump over, because they can easily jump a 6-foot barrier. So you need something a little bit more than that. But to be able to get close enough to them to sort them through some smaller gates and things like that, we put our people on elevated catwalks. And so you still have a barrier between you and the animal, but you're walking on this elevated walkway so that you can see over the barrier. So that keeps our people safe. But it's a high stress thing for the animals. So that's why, if you come to the working, you'll notice it gets very much kind of a machine sort of operation to it. It's like a factory, boom, boom, boom. And the emphasis is on speed. We're trying to be careful. Of course, human safety is the biggest concern, but animal safety is a huge concern also. But speed is important. You don't want those animals to linger. You don't want them to be held together in those tightly confined situations for too long, because the longer they're jammed together, the more agitated they get. And so you have to keep moving them. You gotta move them through that squeeze chute and keep the widgets moving,
Well,
So the pressure is to keep
as soon as
going.
you do the last thing to them, do they just run off then?
Oh yeah.
If you're not going to put them in another pen.
Yeah,
Roll back.
if it all works correctly, you catch an animal in the squeeze chute, it only takes maybe 30, 40 seconds to reach in there, scan the animal. If it's a keeper, boom, 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 we give it a certain number of vaccinations depending on what our vet suggests for that year. The animal gets weighed, the whole squeeze chute sits on electronic scales. So all that stuff goes in the computer, like I say, in 30 or 40 seconds, usually we're done. the
Open
squeegee
the
gets
door.
thrown open and pew, they fly out of there like a little furry rocket. Yeah, they don't appreciate it, which kind of hurts my feelings. We're trying to do, we're
Well,
doing what's best for
They
them.
look
But
front heavy. So
Yeah,
I'm
they
surprised
do.
they can jump like
They
you
do, but yeah, they kind of have that Arnold Schwarzenegger sort of they look like they're all upper body, But they have tremendous power in their hindquarters too, so that's what gives them that launching power. So they have a pretty good vertical leap, and they can spin very quickly too. Is the thing you have to really watch on them, so they can turn on a dime. So very quick acceleration.
say. Do they ever have twins?
Very rarely. We've never known of having twins. Yeah, yeah. It's very rare in bison.
But once you turn them back loose, then it could be maybe another year or two before you see the same one again. You said
Right.
would be interesting if you could tag them and watch where they go. I mean, map where they go. And
We have done some of that with Oklahoma State.
Just curious.
Yep. So Sam Fullendorf had a student. Brady Allred was a PhD student that worked out here for years. So Brady had collars on, I think at 1.5 bison, female bison, and then we also collared some domestic livestock. Some of the research questions he was interested in was comparing bison and cattle behavior. And so, yeah, we had GPS collars on them for 4 or 5 years or so, I want to say.
And they left them on. They didn't try to rub them off.
Well, these are big leather collars.
Oh,
Yeah.
so they could.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So they're pretty well on there once you put them on. Yeah.
Well, on the preserve, how many ponds do you know offhand?
Yeah, I used to know that. I want to say probably about 130, 140, and they're all man-made.
That's what's my
Livestock
next one.
ponds,
If they were
right.
natural or
Yeah, yeah. Fair amount of live water too. Sand Creek is the primary stream system that runs through the central part of the preserve, and it's pretty much a year-round stream, especially kind of from the headquarters downstream. The upper stream, the upper part of it will dry up typically in the heat of the summer. But a fair amount of live water too from all the streams and springs, things like that.
well, on dry years or when we've had drought, bison, you just let them. Do you bring water in or just let nature take its course?
No, and we've deepened a number of our ponds to try to make them, I wouldn't say drought proof, but to where they hold several years worth of water. It's all about depth, and so if you can get down there, if you can have the deepest part of your pond be 15 or 20 feet deep, then and a relatively small surface area, then you cut down on some of that evaporation through the years, and it'll be longer lasting.
Well, this may be dumb too. Are they like cattle and go out in the middle of it?
I mean, they
cool
do
off?
wade in there to drink, but they don't tend to linger, and that's one of the things that Brady found in his research. Bison tend to go in, get a drink, pull back out. So they don't really linger in the water, either in ponds or on the streams, and so we really don't see much stream impact for one issue that people are concerned about, especially out west in those western rangelands. So yeah, bison tend to they want to get back out to the prairie. At the same time, kind of at the other end of the scale, they don't use the woodlands near as much as you might expect. So we have a fair amount of cross timbers, especially this post oak, blackjack oak, kind of the upland forest, scattered around the preserve. About 20% of the preserve is wooded, most of that being this upland native timber. And then of course along the major streams, it's wooded too. But the bison don't use that near as much as what you would expect, especially as compared to cattle. So cattle will like to hang out in the shade when it gets real hot. The bison don't do that. They just, even on the hottest day, they'll be out there in the sun, and just 100 yards away is some nice, dense, shady cover. Nope. They want to be out in the prairie. And they're like big solar collectors, that dark skin. Oh, geez, yeah, it looks like they're just suffering, but who knows what they're thinking, but I assume, again, they evolved in a prairie and an open grassland situation. They're most comfortable out in the open. That's their forage base, of course, out there too. That's what they're looking to chew on is the grasslands. And so they might have a little bit of a behavioral long-term memory in the species. Let's stay away from those woodlands because that's where those humanoids hang out with the sharp sticks. They're going to poke me and eat me. So let's stay out here in the open where we can see them. Yeah. So.
We don't have heat strokes or.
No.
You wouldn't know that if we did.
They are a tremendously hardy species. I mean, they've evolved with the landscape. They have truly evolved with this landscape. One of the interesting things about these bison, this is bison. This is the subspecies bison. So this is the plains bison subspecies that we have here. Same subspecies that's in Yellowstone. Well, historically throughout the United States, that's what we had. So those early explorers, this was the animal that they saw. This was the animal that Native Americans were living on for centuries. But if you dig into kind of some of the paleontology of it, this is a fairly recent species. So as I understand it, only 6,000 or 7,000 years old. This modern bison is only about 6,000 or 7,000 years old. So it evolved under the influence of Native Americans creating this grassland. So if you roll back time, and forgive me for the loose numbers, but 13,000, 14,000 years ago was the peak of the last glaciation. And at that time, what I understand what the botanists say is at that point in time, this part of Oklahoma would have been more like northern Canada is now. It was more of a boreal type forest. Fir, jack pine, much colder environment. About soon after that was when native peoples arrived in North America. So sometime after that peak glaciation was when Native Americans got here, started using fire for all sorts of different reasons. But as the prairies receded and their use of fire, that combination, kind of the climatological shift and this new fire agent out there, that's what really created the Great American Grasslands. So again, if you could go back in time somehow, exclude people from the continent until now, we wouldn't be sitting in a tallgrass prairie landscape. This would be a wooded landscape. With the lack of fire over thousands of years, this would not be a prairie. If the only ignition source was lightning strikes, no, this would not be a prairie. And so there's this growing recognition in conservation circles and in rangeland circles that really what we have in North America, much of these grasslands were really created by native peoples and their use of fire. And so it's an anthropogenic landscape. And oh, by the way, this modern bison species popped up during that whole conversion process. And so you can kind of make the argument that this modern species of bison is really an anthropogenic species. It was created during the formation of this landscape. There were many previous forms of bison, ancient species, but this was the one that made it through the bottleneck, made it through all that repeated glaciation, the invasion of peoples to the continent. And so this is the system that we inherited. And so from a conservation perspective, again, what we're trying to do is roughly replicate those forces, that fire-grazing interaction, because that's what, those were the forces of nature that created and maintained this landscape for eons. And so that's the biological diversity we want to provide for. So it's an interesting system. People have been playing with fire out here for thousands of years. I've been playing with fire since I was a little boy, so this fits me really well. Yeah.
Were you a Boy Scout?
Somewhat. I didn't make it quite that far.
Okay.
But some of my buddies and I, when we were little, our thing was to light fires and see how big they would get before we freak out and try to put them out, So I think humans in general are captivated by fire. It's such a powerful force. It's mysterious and powerful all at the same time. So I sure got bit by that bug way back. So lighting fires for prescribed fires is
So you stand
fun
and
stuff.
watch? Do you stand and watch today?
Oh yeah.
You do?
Yeah. I take a lot of pictures, a lot of video. Yeah.
I mean, I figured someone has to watch, but not necessarily you, I guess.
Yeah. So we have a very active fire program out here. We've burned the preserve, I want to say, about 9 times over now. We're somewhere around 350,000 acres through the years is what we've burned on purpose with our controlled burn program, or our prescribed fire program as we call it. We burn under just certain prescriptive conditions. So it's a managed fire enterprise. But again, this landscape depends on fire, and so we deliver a lot of fire.
Well, you mentioned earlier that the lesser prairie, no, the lesser chicken, prairie chicken, doesn't like wind turbines. Is that a problem? I mean, is that an issue?
It's a challenge, yeah, for us, for the Nature Conservancy. I mean, renewable energy is a cool thing. We're very supportive of zero carbon emission type energy sources, wind and solar, things like that. But again, for us, we're focused on the real estate. And what's the first rule of real estate? Location, location, location. Maybe it's 3 rules. And so it's all about where you put things. And so for us, yeah, we're supportive of the general concept of renewable energy, but it can have a disturbing effect, especially in a prairie environment like this. Here again, we only have 4 to 5% of this original tallgrass prairie left. I mean, we don't have a whole lot left. Geez, let's try to find that wind and solar are somewhat more flexible. I mean, especially as compared to hydro. You know, hydro, you got to put it on the river, right? These other sources of energy are a little bit more flexible, and so what we try to do is work with the industry to help them find more suitable locations. We have a preserve out towards Enid, a little 40-acre prairie that it's just a little postage stamp prairie. It's surrounded by wheat fields, and it has here in the last few years a big wind project that's come right around it, about 200 turbines, and we think that's great. That landscape has, 99% of it's been converted to ag lands, to till agriculture. And so it will never be a large-scale conservation effort like this. And so that preserve, we look at it more like, maybe there's some insect species, some plant species there that are of concern, and we try to take care of that property and manage it, but it will never have greater prairie chickens on it. It'll never have, wide-ranging species like that, badgers and stuff like that. And so we think that's the appropriate place for wind energy in that situation. That's already a fragmented landscape. Wow, knock yourself out, build more of them. But in this intact native prairie, they're not making any more of it. Geez, let's try to find an alternative location. So again, it comes down to location, location, location. We'd have the same perspective if you're talking about any other big industrial development. Let's try to find someplace else rather than having that disturbing footprint out here.
Or is there more land around that you would like to absorb into this? I mean, is it in the shape that you would want to?
Yeah, I think our our long-term challenge here is not so much adding to the land base of the preserve, but trying to work off the preserve with our private landowner neighbors. Our conservation goal for this region is to try to maintain that intactness of the entire Flint Hills, or in Oklahoma we call it the Osage Hills, But again, this roughly 4 to 5 million acres that's left here, and we're kind of at the southern end of it. But about 4 to 5 million acres is what this Flint Hills, Osage Hills landscape is, that runs really from Tulsa up to almost to the Nebraska boundary, up through Kansas. That's the last big chunk of tallgrass prairie left in the world, is right here. It's 90-some% privately owned. We can't buy 4 to 5 million acres. The politics would be terrible if we tried to, even if we had that kind of money, and we don't have that kind of money. And so I think our challenge, but our conservation objective is, again, to maintain that intactness of that landscape, maintain those native species that are out there. Things like greater prairie chickens, if jump ahead 100 years from now, if all that's left in this Flint Hills landscape is our 40,000 acres, and somehow the rest of it goes to some other land use that converts it from prairie, we are not going to have greater prairie chickens anymore. They cannot, a viable population cannot survive on 40,000 acres. They need much bigger landscape than that. And so, especially these species, monarch butterflies, I mean, these species that have huge ranges, that have a complex reproductive history, they need big spaces. And so, again, our conservation objective for our organization is to maintain the complete Flint Hills landscape. And so how are we gonna do that? We think increasingly that's gonna be working with private landowners using tools like conservation easements. How can we put some money in a rancher's pocket? How can we reward him for maintaining his prairie in an unfragmented, undeveloped situation? How can we maintain the status quo? What kind of tools can we use to incentivize that land use long term? And we've had a lot of luck with that up in Kansas. We're somewhere 40,000 acres or so is what we, the Conservancy with partners, has placed under conservation easement protection. And so I think that's a tool we're increasingly looking at. But again, our mission, our objective is to try to maintain the big green, and we're not going to do it by buying it. And so I think that's our next challenge here is how do we get off the reservation, so to speak, to engage in conservation issues in our bigger neighborhood.
Education.
Yeah.
Education.
And that's what's driven us. This is ranching. This is a ranching landscape, right? This Flint Hills. This is nature's feedlot. You don't get any kind of better cattle gains than you do right here. I mean, it's just tremendously productive. But this is a ranching culture, a ranching environment. We made a conscious decision years ago. If we're going to engage in conservation issues around us, agricultural issues, who are ranchers going to listen to? Are they going to listen to the Nature Conservancy, as we call it? We're going to maybe be a little suspect long term. We try to be very practical, very real world sort of folks, And so we made a conscious decision, if we're going to try to influence agriculture, who does agriculture listen to? They listen to the Extension Service, Oklahoma State Extension Service. And so we've worked through the decades to develop and maintain a very strong relationship with OSU. As I mentioned earlier, our primary research partner has been Oklahoma State University. And a lot of that work is along the lines of kind of applied research, almost an extension station or experiment station type function. And so that's why we have about 11,000 acres in the northeast part of the preserve that we've had patch burn grazing research going on with Oklahoma State since 2001. So the idea, this was kind of a partnership project that popped up back almost 20 years ago now. But the idea being, how can we manage domestic livestock more creatively to maintain a more diverse landscape for wildlife benefits? How can we take some of the lessons we've learned from our fire bison unit, simplify things a little bit, make it a little bit easier to manage? How can we do some of the same things with cattle that we're doing with bison? And so the term that's been coined is patch burn grazing. And so Sam Fullendorf and Dave Engel they're kind of the grandfathers of this whole idea at OSU. Now Dwayne Elmore, Terry Bidwell was for sure in on that early stuff. And there's just this tremendous team over there at Oklahoma State that we've managed to work with. We've been blessed to work with through the decades. And it's been just a tremendous partnership of working with those guys to help find the funding, some cooperative grant chasing, some internal funding that we've provided to get graduate students out here to address specific questions to kind of feed into that whole science export attempt to try to influence land management in the bigger neighborhood. And it's been a tremendous partnership.
Has milkweed been a part of that discussion?
Milkweed, yeah. Yeah, so the whole pollinator issue, of course, has popped up here in the last few years. I think it was really first starting with the whole honeybee collapse problem that was seen across the country with domestic honeybees, and then more recently with monarchs, with them getting a lot of attention with their population problems. And so we're actually on our third go-round of patch burn grazing research with cattle, again on this 11,000 acres, and we're still working out the bugs on what the new treatments are going to be. We've got a number of pastures involved, but we think Sericea lespedeza is going to be one of the issues we look at, which is our primary non-woody invasive weed problem, a Southeast Asian plant it's the 800-pound gorilla for the whole southern tallgrass region. It's invading so much of our native prairies. So Sericea lespedeza is going to be part of what we're looking at, but then also native pollinators. How can we design some fire cattle grazing treatments to, on the one hand, hopefully control Sericea, and on the other hand, hopefully benefit native pollinators like monarchs and the other, and honey and bumblebees, and the whole suite of native pollinators out there. So kind of the good and the bad. Our new treatments are going to look at kind of both ends of the spectrum.
I think I've read somewhere there used to be a butterfly program. Do they still have that?
We do an annual butterfly count.
Yeah, something like butterfly monitoring program.
Yeah, yeah. They call it the 4th of July count, but it's usually not on the 4th of July. It's somewhere right in there. Yeah.
Or the monarchs are usually not, probably already passed if they're migrating during that time.
Pretty well, yeah, I think so. I mean, we've had some individual work. Ray Morantz, if you know
I recognize
Ray,
the name. I haven't talked with him.
was a graduate
he's on my
student
list.
that did some work out here and also in Iowa with monarchs and other butterflies. So we've had a number of projects come through looking at different scientific questions with monarchs and pollinators, but they're getting more and more attention all the time. Yeah.
I think I was told you had a good monarch story memory from first time you saw a bunch or something.
Oh, I just remember, in the fall, especially when they're coming through in autumn, it can be real striking on those colder mornings. They seem to really hang on the goldenrods. So in late summer, this is in September, maybe into early October, there'll be a lot of goldenrods blooming, and in the cool mornings, the monarchs are just hanging on there by the dozens, and typically they're covered with dew, so it takes them a while to dry off before they can fly, and so it's this just thousands of acres of wet, soggy monarchs waiting for the opportunity to take off again. But yeah, they'll come through in kind of pulses like that. It's visually really impressive stuff. Yeah.
So you find you a spot and watch.
Yeah, they're just cool to. I'm just amazed they know where they want to go.
Yeah, I haven't figured that out.
Itty bitty little butterfly brain, and they talk about hard wiring. They've just got that instinct in their DNA.
And they like the new burn areas too, from what I understand.
Yeah, so Kristen Baum has done some of that work showing that, again, what we do is some summer burns. Both in our bison unit, we're experimenting with summer burns in some of our cattle treatments too. But summer burns being July, August, in through there, sometimes in September. And, the native milkweeds, some of them are getting ready to bloom already here this spring, but they're usually done with their blooming at that point, late in the summer. But it looks like when we burn in late summer, it kind of resets those plants. And so if you have adequate soil moisture in the late summer and you do a prescribed burn, you'll get some regrowth of those. The milkweeds will grow back, and sometimes they'll reflower. So it kind of resets their clock a little bit. And so, boom, that's a whole new nectar source, a whole new attractant for these native pollinators that otherwise really is starting to die out with season shutting down. So it kind of provides a whole second flush that they are quite attracted to. So, yeah, kind of something that I don't think people have really thought of before, the impact of off-season burns, as most folks think of it. Most of the fire around here happens in the early spring, in March and April. That's when, from a range management perspective, most of the fire happens. But again, historically, we know that fire was happening year-round. So as we tease apart some of those questions, you run into information that you wouldn't really have thought of before. The impact of these different seasons of fire on these different species. It's like, oh, yeah.
Well, do you plant like milkweed, or do you just let nature take its course?
Yeah,
too?
yeah,
That's
yeah,
what
we
I-
don't plant anything, yeah.
That's what
It's all here.
and native plants and all that. The tribes are the one I interviewed. They just did an inventory of like 120 something native plants. So you don't do that though.
Well, I mean, we've done an inventory of our plant
What you have
community.
here, but you
Yeah.
don't add more to it.
No, no. And Mike Palmer from the botany department, he'd be a good guy to talk to about the botany out here. He's the one that primarily built our herbarium. So if you want to look at our
Okay.
plant collection in here. But Mike and his students through the years really built the voucher specimens for us. And he's had several publications, of course. He's quite the scientist too, but he has one publication in particular that's really the species list for the preserve. 760 some species of plants.
Wow.
Quite a bit more than what we expected when we bought the place. So the preserve, the ranch had quite a bit of intact, plant diversity in there, and a whole number of different milkweed species. And so, yeah, Mike could be a good guy to talk to about the overall plant diversity of the place. But that's what we've been blessed with. In many parts of the country, especially in the upper Midwest, you get up in Minnesota and, well, a lot of the tallgrass region that's been plowed. Over the last few decades, there's been this growing interest in prairie reconstruction, more than prairie restoration. So, as I understand the definition, prairie reconstruction is where you're starting with a cornfield. What used to be a prairie, but for maybe 100 years has been plowed and planted for corn or soybeans or something. But then for conservation purposes, the desire is to take that back to a native prairie. Wow, that's hard work. To try to get hundreds of species back in there is a tremendous, it's fairly easy to get the dominant grasses in there. But all these different forb species, all the broadleaf plants, that's the big challenge. And so, like I say, we're blessed here that very little of this landscape has ever been plowed. Probably just a few acres right around the headquarters here. We know historically there used to be some big gardens for the ranching operation. Right here in front of the bunkhouse, maybe 5 or 10 acres was plowed. We burn it every year to try to push it back towards native species. But the vast majority of this ranch was never plowed. And so I think our job here is prairie restoration. Restoration in terms of the mechanics of the prairie, the grazing and fire, the processes. We've been able to just leapfrog over all that hard work. We don't have to plant anything back. It's here. We just have to manage it more creatively. So yeah, we're way ahead of those poor suckers that are starting with soybean fields. That's tough work. Very expensive too, to try to plant a prairie back.
Well then, so as far as monarchs are concerned, you're not doing anything specifically for them.
No, so we kind of again, our general operating hypothesis is the best way to maintain biological diversity is to maintain this habitat diversity. Mm-hmm. So this crazy quilt of burned patches, unburned patches, grazers moving around, and so at any given moment in time it makes a lot more sense if you fly over. And you can look down and you can see those different patch types and the different amounts of grass. You can see where the animals are grazing, where they're not grazing. And so the idea is to have this complete array of habitat opportunities for all these different species, some of which we probably don't even know about. But the operating hypothesis is that's the way the prairie used to function. That's the natural disturbance regime that maintained these species for eons. So there's a certain element of blind trust there that we should get the machine going again, and that will provide the opportunity for all these organisms to come along and these ecosystems, almost a living arc approach, as I think of it. And so we would assume that things like monarchs benefit from that. We have a healthy population of American burying beetles. If you're familiar with the ABB, it's an endangered species, so it's listed with the Endangered Species Act. And we have one of the larger known populations here. Again, we don't manage specifically for American burying beetles. But we've had a team of scientists out here working on them for just about 10 years now. They come back every summer, do a lot of trapping, marking, capturing the beetles, putting tags on them, mark recapture sort of things. And what we found through the years is that they move with the patches, they seem to move with drought cycles, but the big picture seems to be that, they like this diversity, this landscape patchy idea seems to benefit them. You know, create this smorgasbord, let the species figure out where they want to go through time, and they can move around from year to year. And that seems to be working well with things like American berry beetles.
Burn it and will come, is that what you said before?
Burn it and they will come, yeah. And they're, you know, the ABBs are really, the American berry beetles are a really interesting species. They are our biggest native bearing beetle in the United States, or in North America. About 1.5 inches, 2 inches long. And their ecological role is that they are the nature's undertakers. So their reproductive biology is they have these antennae with these little pom-poms kind of on the end of the antennas. Look like little orange pom-poms, little OSU orange. And they apparently can chemorecept, they can smell a dead carcass from several miles away. And so they fly around sniffing the air, and what they're trying to find is a small mammal or a grassland bird that's recently died. They come to the carcass, they fight over the carcass, males and females, till it gets down to a alpha male and an alpha female, kind of the two top dogs. They wrap the carcass in a secretion that apparently retards the decomposition of the carcass. So this research team that's working here, it's a husband-wife team. She's a biochemist also, but she's looking at the chemical properties of that mucus. That could have medical, or medical use in the future. So yeah, you go in to get something treated, and they're going to swab a little bit of mucus on you from an American berry beetle. Who knows? It'll prevent decay. Anyway, they clip all the hair, all the feathers off the carcass. They wrap it in this secretion. They bury it by digging out underneath it. It takes about 24 hours, so the carcass sinks into the ground. They lay their eggs in the carcass, so that's the food source for their eggs. They then tend those pupae once they hatch. They tend them, which is really odd for an insect to hang around to take care of the babies. Usually they lay the eggs and move on. But it's this very complex reproductive history that they have here. And so apparently burn it and their customers will come. The grassland birds or small mammals, whatever's dying out there on those patches, that's to the advantage of American berry beetles. That's what they're looking for.
Hopefully dying of natural causes.
Who knows? Yeah, who knows what's going on there. There's still a whole lot to be known about, all these interactions.
Are snakes part of the, I guess they'd have to be part of the picture too, snakes?
Oh yeah. A lot of herps out here. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's all these little aspects of nature that, that's one of the interesting things about research is you're getting kind of more and more information. We know, there's a rattlesnake master borer moth. So there's a moth species, a small little moth species, kind of nondescript looking thing, but it's known to be an obligate. It has to have a certain species of plant. So the rattlesnake master plant kind of looks like a yucca, but it's not a yucca. But it has to have that species of plant. It bores into the stem. That's where it lays its eggs, is in the stem of that plant. So it's an obligate on that plant. If you don't have that plant, you don't have the moth. And there's probably many relationships like that we don't know about.
That's like the monarchs have to have the milkweed.
Yeah.
They have to have the milkweed.
So it's very, very complex stuff. Yeah.
Well, of all these 40 acres, do you have a favorite, or 40,000 acres, do you have a favorite spot?
Yeah, I kind of like the east side over there. The public access is really on the west side of the preserve, and so you get over on the far east side, and there's places where you just don't see the hand of humans. Miles and miles, it's just open prairie country, and kind of looks like it did a couple hundred years ago, I would expect. You know, so it's with bison running around, so it's a pretty cool part of the world.
And how do you get there? When you're,
Or you can either drive across some ranch roads, or you can come in from the east side. Yeah,
no,
but
you
it's-
don't walk in, you drive in.
Yeah, usually, yeah, truck or four-wheeler. We use four-wheelers a lot for getting around,
Not a
for
horse.
access. No, not so much. I mean, our staff, we have four guys that live out here, and I guess 3 of them have their own horses. They're all former cowboys, you know. Now they're nature boys, but they stood a lot of cowboying during the summertime, especially during shipping season with cattle. So they have their own horses. We did have some company horses back in the early days, but the 300 bison that we had donated to us, we knew there were 2 adult female cows in there that had killed horses. And so we thought, well, that's probably not a good idea. So we've always used machines to move the bison around, either pickup trucks or four-wheelers, and not horses. The buffalo or the bison, they can turn on a horse, and yeah, it can get ugly. Yeah.
Well, have you been on every foot of it, you think, or close to it?
Oh, I don't know about every foot.
Every acre?
Probably not every acre even.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's some real rough country over on the eastern part where Sand Creek leaves us. There's some, getting to that cross timbers country where you've got some post-oak blackjack on the uplands. And there's some nice 40, 50-foot sandstone cliffs over there. Very primitive, Bigfoot looking, you know, kind of wild and crazy looking country. Yeah. So it's
would
got some
assume
wild places.
I would assume it's been surveyed, the whole thing like that, though.
Oh, yeah.
At some point, somebody's been
Yeah.
there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's a fun project. I mean, it's got some scale to it. So we use the term landscape a lot in conservation dialogue. I don't know if that has a real hard definition to it, but to me, landscape is when you can spin 360 degrees and what you're seeing is still native habitat. Ooh, that's what we got. So this is, I think a lot of our visitors are surprised in this part of the world because it's really this Osage, Flint Hills landscape is something you expect more out in the true west, in those far western states. You don't expect it in this part of the country where there's still a fair amount of agriculture, a lot of farming practices going on. And so I think of this Osage Flint Hills as kind of an ecological island. Still has this native prairie on it. It's escaped the plow because of the shallowness of it, the stoniness of the soil. That's really why it's still here, because it could not be plowed. So it's an ecological island, but it's also a cultural island. So this is cowboy country. You know, this is not farming country. So there's still a real strong cowboy history here, cowboy culture. The Ben Johnson Memorial roping each year. You know, Osage County Cattlemen's Association is a big organization. So it's a neat neighborhood to work in. So, and I think there's an appreciation for this, for the big green, for this big intact landscape. You know, people feel that.
It's great. It's been a pretty drive out.
Mm-hmm.
I'm surprised the movies haven't found it.
They have off and on, yeah.
But
Yeah,
have
so we've
they?
had a little bit of that action. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That could do more harm than good.
Yeah, you got to be careful with what you allow them to do. No Fast and Furious, you know, movies out here.
Although in the gravel you could spin pretty good.
Yeah. Keep them off the prairie though. Yeah.
Yeah. So you've been here almost 30 years. Planning to put in 50?
Oh, I don't know. We'll see. But it's fun. Yeah.
Never a dull day.
Right. It's a neat job, and it varies so much from day to day, and the cast of characters that you get to work with is a lot of fun. You get to meet people like yourself. It's just it's a stimulating environment, you know. So it's a lot of fun.
What would you consider your tools of the trade, besides the hat?
Tools of the trade. Well, you got to have a little gift for gab, as my daughter tells me. So you got to, I think in this conservation business, you got to be a little bit of a salesman, you know, you got to be able to get the message out there. So a little bit of that stuff, especially with this project where, yeah, part of our mission is to engage in the neighborhood. And I think just some technical skills in terms of the biology of it involved. Fire, I've learned a lot about fire through the years, so that's been a lot of fun. And bison. I mean, the first time I was around bison was up in the Dakotas, and they kind of grow on you. They're just a kind of a mystical, magical. What I really like about bison is they still kind of have that prehistoric sort of look to them. They're real rugged and kind of funky looking, and they still act like they're a wild species. So they're pretty neat to be around, you know.
Well, do you carry a pocket knife?
Yeah, and sometimes a pistol. Feral hogs are an increasing problem throughout Oklahoma. So we've had the USDA helicopter guys helping us with the pig problem here in the last year. And so, yeah, that's going to be a ongoing challenge.
You kill them or just trap them and take them
Oh,
off?
no, we shoot them, yeah.
You shoot them?
Yep. So a little over 400 feral hogs is what we took off the preserve last year.
Wow. That's not
They do
something
a
that would have been
lot.
on a prairie.
No, they're not native.
Not native.
Yeah, quite destructive. You know, they can just completely tear up the prairie. They flip it upside down. Basically eat anything they can catch in terms of ground nesting birds and small mammals and turtles and snakes and everything else. I mean, they're just
Well,
consumers.
Building a fence doesn't keep them out then. You'd have to do,
Pretty tough the way they can get underneath things. Yeah. Barbed wire doesn't keep out pigs.
or do you keep a camera with you most of the time to take pictures?
Your phone, yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's
Yeah,
true.
used to carry all these separate devices, you know, a separate GPS and a separate camera. Now it's all in your phone.
Well, do you even have reception here?
Most places, now down in the valley, like right around headquarters here, you won't. But if you get up on the ridge lines, typically you do. Yeah.
So do you use your computer much for work purposes?
Oh yeah.
Doing research or?
Mhm. Yeah. Everything's on laptop. Yeah.
Yeah.
Your office is where your computer is, right? So.
That's something you've had to learn along the way too.
Yeah, back in the old days. Yeah, it was all paper. We were supposed to be paperless, right?
By now, sure,
I
yes.
know.
It's not happening.
But we do an awful lot of stuff. I get very little paper mail nowadays. I mean, everything's done by email, and that's the way you move documents around. Unless something needs to be signed, then it's still printed out, but a whole lot of electronic stuff. Yeah.
And the headquarters is what, 15 miles from town-ish?
Yeah, about 17 miles from Main Street in Pawhuska. Right.
So you said you live in Barnardville.
Mhm, yep.
So you have quite a commute to
Yeah.
get to here.
Yeah, it's 45 minutes from my driveway to get, if I can come through the shortcut, you know, if it hasn't been raining too much. But some days I work at home, down in my little cubby hole down in the basement. If it's just a paperwork day, then I'll work at home because I've got a little bit better internet access there. We have a satellite dish here on the research station, but it's a little bit slower, and it goes through a monthly, they track you by month, so once you get to your cap, then things will really slow down. So during the summertime, when all the researchers are here and the students, we try to have people be moderate in their use of the internet, but invariably you get a week or two into the new month, they start putting you in the slow lane. Yeah. So.
And I was reading there's a mesonet site on.
Mm-hmm.
Is it within close to here?
Yeah, just west of headquarters.
Just west.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the 4-acre site, they name them by the closest town. So if you look on the mesonet page, it'll call it the 4-acre site, but it's the
It's here?
station on us. Yeah.
Okay.
That's a great deal. That was back in the early 90s or so when that program came around, and we kind of caught wind that this thing was coming, and so we contacted what later became the Mesonet program, said, ooh, if you're looking for a site, we'd love to have you put one of these automated stations on us, and we got it. So it's a great thing because Mesonet completely maintains the apparatus itself, all the gizmos, and they archive all the data. And with all the research activities out here, every researcher wants a slightly different, tell me what's been happening the last 10 years in February. Let me, I said, whoa. That's, no, we don't archive that. Here's the email, here's the guys you need to contact. So it's great to have that information collected from us by a partner that's professional, and they're doing everything. All we do is provide the site. So it's a wonderful deal.
Has a tornado come through here since you've been here?
Oh yeah, we've had a couple of tornadoes. The last significant one, again, ask Mike Palmer because he's studied the impact on the cross timbers. It came through some of the timber. It was probably about 10 years ago now, but down at the southern end of the preserve. And it picked a line at the time. It was before we had the bison in that area, so there was still a fair amount of cattle fencing. But the way that funnel came across, it was, if you could have drawn a line to where it would impact the most fence, yeah, so it kind of came through and screwed with a whole bunch of fence, but actually pulled up that high voltage line at the south end of the preserve. It pulled 2 sets of those poles out of the ground, so it sucked the power line up, popped the poles out of the ground, and then set it back down. So yeah, but it was only a F1 or F2, wasn't all that powerful as those things go.
Yeah, you wonder what happens to the bison while they're, do they know they must know to get out of the way.
Yeah, we have lost animals. We're pretty confident to lightning. You'll find a dead bison that's just laying there. It's like you just flipped the switch and he went to sleep, mouthful of grass and damage to the feet. Yeah, so we assume those are lightning strike hits. But they're a good target out there. They tend to like to be on the hilltops, is where the bison tend to like to hang out. And so yeah, they make a pretty good target. But generally what I've seen is when we have storms coming through, it's not like they spook and run or anything. It's just another day on the prairie, you just hunker down. Again, they're very low maintenance. The bison industry, the private bison industry, is estimated to be about 500,000 bison now in North America. There's quite a few in Canada, but Canada and the United States. And it seems like, especially in the northern plains, periodically they'll have a really bad winter and some terrible blizzards, and there'll be a lot of domestic livestock that get lost, even in feedlots. And right after those events, you'll see an uptick in the bison business, where more of those guys, especially in the Dakotas and Nebraska and eastern Montana and Wyoming, some of those guys will shift to bison because they see bison on their neighbors that are unimpacted by blizzards. Kind of the bison general response behaviorally, they face the wind and they just kind of spread out, and most of their thicker hair is on their front end, on their heads and their faces, and that robe on the front quarters, and so they just face the wind and tough it out. Typically cattle will turn and blow with the wind. They move with the wind, and then they'll hit a barrier or a fence or something, and they start wadding up, and the snow will fill in around them, and then you can get a lot of damage, a lot of loss in feedlots where the cattle will ball up. They get buried in the snow, and then other animals climb on top of them, so you end up with compaction. And the bison will do that even at feedlot, from what I understand. They stay spread out, they just face the wind, and just let it flutter right through them. Our animals, it seems like when you see them act the most playful, running, kicking, butting around on each other, and just acting like it's a fun day, is when you have one of those cold fronts coming through, real bad, 20 below, wind chills, and boy, the bison just love that stuff. It makes them frisky. So I think they've seen a number of ice ages through the eons, and You know, they've survived some pretty tough stuff. And so for them, I think it's just a nice cold day, no flies, you know, whoo! Just a nice day on the prairie. Yeah, so they're a pretty low maintenance animal, really.
I think probably any day's a nice day on the prairie, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Isn't it?
They have a pretty peaceful existence out here, except for about 2 weeks in the fall when we mess around with them. Otherwise, they just are doing what they want to do.
That same thing could be said for you.
Yeah, yeah.
Most
Yeah,
days
for the
would be.
most part, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. It's a nice place to work.
Nice gig.
Mm-hmm.
We've covered a lot. Is there anything else that we need to?
I don't think we kind of touched on some of the OSU partnership stuff.
Anything more about monarchs? Besides the orange and black. Good color.
Yeah, yeah. Kristen will be the one to ask about that stuff. Yeah.
We've covered it.
Yep.
And I asked her and she didn't know either, you probably don't either, but with the wind turbines, you wonder if that is impacting the monarchs and their, their flight pattern, when they're coming through, because that creates another current, I would think.
Yeah, I know there's been some work done up at KU, I think the engineering department. The concern was with private airports, and so I think they were modeling those horizontal turbulences that wind turbines can create. And so they were projecting there could be an impact, it's like 1 or 2 miles beyond the turbines with, these horizontal vortexes. That could be a problem, like for small planes. You would think that would impact anything flying.
Yeah, birds or any kind of,
Yeah.
unless they learn to just fly low.
Yeah,
Go below, which butterflies may, I don't know how high they go.
yeah.
I can imagine it would be gorgeous here when they're coming by, migrating.
Mm-hmm. It's neat. I mean, it's just, they look so random the way they fly, but they apparently
Know where they're going.
know where they want to go, yeah. But it doesn't seem very efficient because, boy, they're all over the place, but they're heading in a general direction, yeah.
And they come through here twice a year, roughly.
Yeah. I think the bigger show is in the fall, or that's what seems to catch your eye more.
Usually about, September, October?
Yeah, I'd say, late September, right in through there. Mm-hmm.
I may have to come back.
Yeah. In the prairie, we're just getting into the spring season with wildflowers. So typically, that's the biggest flush is in the springtime. But if we have adequate soil moisture in the late summer, in August and September, there'll be a kind of a second bloom. A lot of the sunflowers and the composite species will be blooming, so a lot of yellows and purples would be the 2 primary colors. But the bigger, those tend to be some of the big showy forbs, and so it's a nice splash of color right at the end of the growing season that most people aren't thinking about. Most people think of wildflowers just this time of year. So.
Thistles?
Yeah, some thistles.
Thistles?
Yeah. And we have a number of thistles, number of thistle species. Say it fast 10 times, right? But again, you should ask Mike Palmer. My understanding is that they're primarily native thistles, and boy, you see like goldfinches hanging all over them. You pay a lot of money for that thistle seed if you're into feeding birds, but they will take it off the native plants too, of course. So, yeah, I mean, it's all part of the plant diversity. Is those species out there.
I imagine when you're driving in and to and from work, you're conscious, you're looking at trying to catch stuff, or by now, or does it just become an everyday thing, you don't think?
It depends if you're on the phone or not. Used to be, back in the good old days when you were traveling in your vehicle, that's when you were singing with the radio, kind of your own little bubble.
Okay.
Nowadays, with cell phones being what they are, or I feel like I should be doing something. So, maybe not texting, but talking on the radio, trying to catch up with phone calls. So there's not as much singing time, I guess.
Well, but you would notice if something, I haven't, all of a sudden something's there and it wasn't, or things like that catch your attention.
Yeah, especially things like Sericea lespedeza gets to where it's whatever you train your eye to look for. So, problem plants get to be where you're seeing those at 60 miles an hour. Oh geez, you know. Drives my daughter nuts. Don't look at it, Dad, don't look. It's just out there. Cedar trees, things like that, you get to where you notice things that you'd like to fix, you know.
And make a mental note to come do something about it.
Yeah, I might talk to that guy about that. Yeah.
So how
Yeah.
many's on your crew?
We have, here at the preserve, I think we have 10 folks working out here. A couple of those are part-time. Like I mentioned, we've got 4 guys that are full-time that live out here with their families. And the wife of one of the guys works here too. And so it's a multifaceted program. I mean, primarily, most of the manpower is on the stewardship side of things, the land management side of things. Mm-hmm. But then, of course, we have our gift shop, our visitor center. So we have some ladies that run that and help manage our volunteer program. We've got a tremendous docent program, or volunteer docents, about 150, 160 of those folks that really staff our visitor center. They schedule themselves, they go online. It's a very sophisticated program. They recruit and train new people each year. It's this perpetual motion machine.
And they do tours?
Amazing.
They're field trips or whatever?
Not so much. They're trained to speak to visitors about the preserve, about the conservancy, what we're trying to do, some of the cowboy and Indian history, stuff like that, depending, you know, different people are interested in different aspects of the property. So they're kind of trained to speak to all that kind of stuff, and then to kind of manage the gift shop side of things too. But they are, I mean, our docents are really important because they're the face of the preserve. Most people aren't going to run into me or one of our other staff. We're out there hiding in the prairie, you know, doing whatever. And so the docents are really the meeters and greeters, and you know, that's the image that we're projecting as those folks. And they're very motivated and very committed and enthusiastic. They're a sweet bunch of people.
And they know their plants and their critters?
Yeah. So there a number of PhDs involved there. So yeah, very educated, very capable group of people. Yeah, they're a lot of fun.
So your mother would be proud of all these clippings that she sent.
Yeah, my mom, she still kids me that, now I get paid to set fires, you know. So, a little bit more socially redeeming. Yeah, it's just been a personal blessing for me being out here. It's just been a great thing.
Well, it's been good for the land too, it sounds like.
Yeah,
Good steward.
it's cool. And it's you know, we have a long-term perspective, and this conservation stuff takes generations, and so we hope to be here for the very long term, and hope to engage more and more with partners, and we're just not making any more of these big green spaces, so we best get busy trying to save them. Yeah.
Well, before we close, we probably ought to have you talk a little bit about the name,
Yeah, so Joseph Williams, Joe Williams, tremendous influence out here, and so we renamed the preserve in his honor 2 years ago, coming on 3 years. Joe was our first chairman of our state board. So the Nature Conservancy got organized in Oklahoma in 1986. Like I said, we started the feasibility of this project, looking into this, in 1988. Closed on the Barnard Ranch in 89. So Joe was at the helm of our state program at that time. He also served 2 terms, which I think is unprecedented, served 2 terms as the chairman of our national board. That's the really big dogs at the national level. And just so happened at the same time, he was the chairman of our fundraising campaign for the Tallgrass. So if you had to point to one individual that made this thing happen in terms of the financial fundraising part of it, that was Joe Williams. Just a tremendous guy, true conservationist, I mean, to the core, and just his ability, his personal skills with folks at a professional level and at a fundraising level is just unmatched. And so it just made sense to rename the preserve in his honor. Yeah.
Get his permission first.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And it took a while because we had actually approached him a few years before. No. But he's a pretty humble guy. And so it took a while, I think, for him to get comfortable with it. But it was a good thing. It was the right thing to do. Yeah.
And does he live in the area?
He used to live in Tulsa,
Tulsa.
Williams Companies.
Okay.
But now I believe lives in South Carolina. Is where he spends most of his time.
Does he get back to visit the prairie much?
Periodically, yeah. So he was back for the naming ceremony, of course. But yeah, just a sweet guy is what I would call him. Yeah.
And they'll name something for you. What would it be?
No, yeah.
What would it be?
I don't know. Porta John somewhere. Yeah.
Your favorite spot on the east side. Huh?
Yeah. Maybe a rock. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, it's been a great project. Mm-hmm.
Well, if there's nothing else, and if you can't think of anything else to add for the Monarch story, we'll
I think I'm good. Yeah.
we'll sign off and say thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah, that's great.